Software engineering is basically programmatically manipulating data. To manipulate data, you need variables and data types. Let's talk about Python variables and data types today. First of all, if you don't have a clue what variables and data types are and why we have them, don't worry, I cover that in another video which I will link in the description. Pause this video and go check that out. Ready? Okay, let's jump into my computer. Here I have my text editor on the left hand side and my terminal on the right hand side for us to execute the program. Let's talk about variables first. You will get familiar with variables as you advance in programming, but for now think of variables as just labels we give to data so we can reuse the same data in different places. Very similar to variables in mathematical expressions we are used to in school. First, let's write the simplest Python program we know. Let's make a small modification to this. Let's assign this hello world to a variable. A variable name can have one or more characters consisting of lowercase and uppercase letters, numbers, and underscore. But the name cannot start with a number, and you cannot use Python's reserved keywords for variable names as well. What are these keywords? Go to your terminal and run this command to see them all. You'll know them by heart when you advance in Python. Until then, if you see a syntax error in your code when you run it, remember to check if your variable name is a reserved keyword in Python or not. Then we can use the variable name in any place we want to refer to that data, just like inside this print function. Carefully note that we are not using quotations around greeting. We don't want to print the characters greeting, we want to print the data that label greeting refers to. Let's go to the terminal and execute this. We are seeing the same output as before, so this is a good starting point. First, let's take a look at this hello world data. When we write something inside quotation marks, we define a string data type. A string can hold a span or a string of characters. These characters can be any Unicode character you can type. So apart from usual characters, it supports emojis and international languages as well. You can also use some special characters to print some special keyboard inputs. For example, if you want to print a tab, you can use backslash and T, and if you want to print a new line, you can use backslash and N. So when you want to define text data in Python, you would use string data types. Let's write another string type data here. By the way, if you want to add some notes in your code, you can write a comment in Python by starting a text with hashtag. If Python interpreter encountered a hashtag in your code, it will ignore the entire line after and including that hashtag. So you can put anything you want there. Let's put a title for this example here. Let's move to terminal and execute this as well. And you see our new string data is also printed. I also want to show something really cool about print function we use. You can print multiple data in the same line separated by a space if you want. To do that, add multiple data inside the brackets separated by a comma. Let's put the text name in front of my name. I'm using backslash T to put a tab before the colon as well. And let's execute this again and check that we get what we expected. The text name, then a tab, then a colon, and finally the string data that my name variable refers to. Okay, you can do a lot of operations on strings like making everything lowercase or uppercase, combining multiple strings together, formatting strings with other different data, etc. But let's cover that on a different video that's all about Python strings. For now, let's move on to the next data type. Say you want to store your age here, which is a whole number or an integer. You can surely use strings, but if you want to be able to do mathematical expressions on that data, you have to use a different data type, an integer. If you don't put quotation marks around a whole number, you create an integer. This is why variable names can't start with a digit, because that's how Python knows that you defined an integer. Let's print this to see if the integer gets printed as it should. Great. When creating an integer by just typing a number, you define a base 10 integer. There's also a convenient way to define binary, octal and hexadecimal integers as well. To define a binary, just start the number with 0, then simple or capital B. Let's say for whatever reason I wanted to define my age in binary. In that case, I can do this. When we execute this, we should see the same result because no matter what base we use to define it, it's the same data underneath. When you print it, we print it in decimal format. Similarly, to define a hexadecimal, you can start the number with 0, simple or capital X, and for an octal, you can use 0, simple or capital O. Let's move on to the next data type. I also want to define my height here. Since it's not a whole number data, I want a decimal or floating point number. You can define floating point numbers as float type data in Python. If you type a number with the whole part and fractional part separated by a dot like this, you automatically create a floating point number. Let's go to the terminal and see the output again. We see the floating point number printed as well. Python also has another not so commonly used numeric type called complex. As the name suggests, this type is used to store complex numbers. If you don't know, complex numbers are sort of two-dimensional numbers. These numbers are used in advanced mathematics and physics. To write a complex number, you would write something like this. It has a whole number component combined with an imaginary number component. Imaginary number is represented by an integer immediately followed by a simple or capital J. If you don't know what complex numbers are, chances are that you would never use them, so don't worry about this too much. One more thing, all three of these numeric types, which are ints, floats and complex, supports negative numbers as well. If you put a minus sign in front of any of these numbers, you can define a negative number. Okay, next, to represent truth values, we have bool or Boolean data types. Bool type is very important because most of the time your program runs on various decisions it takes. All of these decisions are yes or no decisions, so in another word, true or false. Bool type can only hold these two values. To define a bool type, you create a variable and give it one of these values. Let's add a variable to define if I have a beard or not, which should be true. Again, remember no quotation marks. These are not strings. Then let's go to the terminal and execute. It prints true for has a beard as expected. I want to emphasize again, the reason we use bool type for this instead of having a string type with the word true as the data is because the operations available for strings is completely different from bool. For example, we can do binary operations like and or for booleans, but you can't do that for strings. There's one more very special data type in Python, which is NoneType. As weird as its name, this data type only have one possible value, that's none. The reason why none exists in Python is this. Let's say you want to create a variable, but you don't have the data for it right away when you define it. Later on, you would assign some data to this variable from a user input or from a file. But in Python, variables are a label you give to data. Therefore, you cannot have a variable without data. To solve this, we have NoneType. You simply assign none to the variable when you create it, and later on you assign the correct data to it. We don't have any use for this data type now, but this is how it basically works. I would define a new variable called social security, but assume I don't know the value for it at this point in the program. So we can assign none to that variable. And if we execute this, it would print none. But later on, when we found the correct data, we can reassign the correct data to the variable. Let's execute this again. And you can see first the social security was none, but after assigning the data, it shows the correct data. So that's all the data types in Python. Strings, ints, floats, complex, booleans, and NoneType. Along with these data types, Python also has some inbuilt data structures as well. For example, if you want to define the things that you are allergic to, you can use a list data structure and have a list of strings to hold this information. There are various such data structures, so we will discuss all about them in the next video. But this is it for today. Subscribe to ByteXY, like the video if you liked it. Thank you so much for your time and see you back soon. Bye.